Hi, lovely people. This is African Tales by Gozie. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Come on, let's go. Ojandemo, the flute of spirits. In the heart of a lush forest, nestled amid towering trees and murmuring streams, lay the village of Mavino. It was a place of tranquility and beauty where the rhythms of nature dictated the pace of life. Yet, hidden within the quiet and peaceful village lay a secret that has been passed down through generations, a secret that held the power to bring either life or death. At the heart of this secret was a flute, crafted from the finest wood, but simple in its adornment. Legend had it that the flute belonged to a mighty hunter of old, whose prowess was said to be unheard of, because with a simple flute in hand, he summoned animals from the depths of the forest, drawing them to him with its melody. Thus, the village of Mevino never lacked for meat or food, and its people prospered. As the word of the hunter's flute spread, so did the wealth of the village. Merchants from distant lands traveled to Mavino, eager to trade for the rare and abundant bushmeat and animal hides that the village had to offer. Yet, despite their newfound prosperity, the villagers guarded the secret of the flute with utmost care, for they knew that with great power came great danger, and they feared what might happen should the flute fall into the wrong hands. But as the village of Mavino flourished, so too did the envy of neighboring communities. Tales of its wealth and abundance spread far and wide, drawing the covetous eyes of kings and warlords alike. And although the villagers of Mavino lived in peace, they knew that danger lurked on the horizon, threatening to shatter the fragile tranquility of their forest home. As generations passed, the knowledge of the flute faded into legend. Few within the village remembered the true significance of the flute, and those who did kept their knowledge hidden, lest they attract unwanted attention. And so the flute remained a secret, known only to a select few within the village. In the annals of Marvino's history, there existed a secret, a truth buried deep within the tales of the Oja, the mystical flute that held the power of life and death. While the villagers reveled in the flute's ability to summon abundance from the forest, land, or water, there was a truth that had been lost in the passage of time. It was said that the first man gifted the flute had received it from a woman he had rescued, risking his own life in the process. In return for his selfless art, the woman bestowed upon him the sacred flute, along with a solemn warning. She cautioned him never to harbor evil in his heart, for the power of the Oja was not merely in its music, but in the purity of the soul that wielded it. According to the ancient wisdom passed down through generations, the Oja was an instrument of judgment as much as it was a source of blessing. The state and the condition of the player's heart could determine the nature of the flute's power, shaping the fate of both the wielder and those around them. Thus, it was decreed that the flute must not be played by anyone who had shed innocent blood, for such an art would unleash death and calamity upon the land. This sacred knowledge was entrusted to a select few within the village, who bore the weight of its responsibility with all dedication. They understood the delicate balance between the Oja's potential for both good and evil, and they guarded the flute's secrets with their lives. Yet, as the village faced threat from without, the temptation to wield the power of the Oja grew ever stronger. Whispers of discontent and envy spread among the villagers, and some began to question the wisdom of keeping the flute hidden away. They argued that with the Oja at their disposal, they could defend their home from any who dared to threaten it. but the guidance of the flute remained steadfast in their resolve, reminding their fellow people of the ancient warning. They knew that to succumb to the lure of the flute's magic was to invite disaster upon themselves and their loved ones. And so the Oja remained safely tucked away, its secrets known only to those who understood the true cause of wielding its power. First man known to have played the flute in history carried the weight of the secret that haunted him for years when he first received the Oja from the woman. Despite the warnings he had received from the woman who gifted him the Oja, he had been unable to shake the curiosity that ate at him. Time and again, he had returned to the hut where he had first encountered her, hoping for answers, but each time met the same scene. There was no hut or woman to be found. It was an empty land. Season had turned to years, and still Agunta found himself drawn to the spot where the mysterious woman had vanished. But each time he was met with nothing but empty silence and the whispers of the wind. And so, in fear of what he might discover, he had kept the order hidden away, its haunting melodies silent and unplayed. Yet, fate has a way of intervening when least expected. On a day like any other, as Agonta ventured into the wilderness in search of game to feed his starving village, he took the flute along. The land was parched, ravaged by the worst drought and famine the village had ever known, and the men of Marvino had been forced to range further and further into other kingdoms in search of sustenance. As Agonta and his companions rested on the boundary between their village and the neighboring settlement, exhaustion and despair weighed heavy upon their shoulders after the unsuccessful hunt they had had that day. It was then that Agonta's gaze fell upon the Oja, and he remembered he had taken it along. With a sudden surge of longing, he reached for the flute, feeling its smooth wooden surface beneath his fingers. Closing his eyes, Agonta began to play, the notes of the flute mingling with the soft rustle of dried leaves and the dry hot wind blowing in the acrid land. In that moment, a sense of peace washed over him, as if the music held the power to soothe even the most troubled soul. And as the melody filled the air, Agonta's heart swelled with hope without any explanation. Unknown to Agonta, his companions watched in awe as the music of the flute carried across the land, reaching out to touch the heart of all who heard it. And in that moment, a seed of change was planted, one that would alter the course of Marvino's history forever. As the sweet strain of the Oja filled the air, they sat transfixed, lost in the beauty of the melody. A strange and wondrous thing began to happen. From the depths of the forest, the sound of hoofbeats and rustling leaves grew louder until it seemed as though the very earth itself was trembling beneath their feet. And then, like a rushing tide, the animals came. Squirrels darted through the underbush, followed by graceful deers and majestic antelopes, their eyes wide with wonder as they emerged into the clearing where Agonta and his companions stood. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle breathing of the forest. Then, as if by some unseen command, the animals began to gather around them, forming a vast and teeming multitude that stretched as far as the eyes could see. It was a sight unlike any they had ever witnessed, a symphony of life and movement that seemed to defy explanation. Agunta and his companions stood in awe, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and wonder. What could have caused this miraculous gathering of creatures, they wondered? Was it the magic of the flute, or some other force beyond their understanding? But as they watched, a realization dawned on them. The animals were not here by chance, nor were they simply drawn by the music of the flute. They had come seeking refuge and driven from their homes by the same drought and famine that had plagued the village of Mavino and its environment. In that moment, Agunta understood the true power of the Oja, not as a tool of conquest or domination, but as a beacon of hope in a world wrecked by suffering and despair. And as he looked upon the sea of creatures gathered before him, he knew that it was his duty to protect them, just as he would protect his own people. And with a solemn determination, Agunta raised the flute to his lips once more. The music swelling with a newfound strength and purpose. And as the notes rang out across the clearing, he vowed to use the power of the Oja, not for his own gain, but for the greater good of all. Agunta and his people remained steadfast in their role as protectors, using the power of the Oja only when necessary and never with selfish intent. Their wealth and well-being grew, fueled by the bounty of the land and the harmony they maintained with the creatures of the forest. Though envy may have simmered in the heart of outsiders, their attempts to uncover the village's secrets were met with failure time and time again. Through the passing of generations, Agunta and his descendants safeguarded the flute and its mysteries, ensuring that its power remained untainted by greed or malice. But as the years wore on and Agunta's age grayed or began to die, he knew that the time had come to relinquish his burden. With solemn reverence, Agunta returned to the site where he had last seen the woman who bestowed the Oja to him. There, beneath the shade of the ancient tree that stood just where the hut had been, he buried the flute, its secrets hidden once more from the world. For he feared that in the hands of the people, the flute's power could be wielded for destruction as easily as for creation. As time passed and generations came and went, the village of Mavino faded into memory, its secrets lost to the annals of history. Yet, the legend of the flute lived on, passed down through the ages as a tale of wonder and mystery. In that village once known as Mavino, life continued much as it has always. Yet, amidst the hustle and bustle of everyday existence, there lived a poor widow and her deaf and dumb son, unaware of the treasure buried beneath their feet, waiting silently to be discovered once more. Muna, the deaf and dumb boy, stumbled upon the flute by chance while playing by himself in his mother's empty garden, its beauty and simplicity captivating him. Not knowing what else to do with it, he put it in his mouth, imitating the village flute player, despite his inability to hear its sweet melodies. Ignorant of its true powers, he blew into the instrument with childish curiosity, unaware of the power he was about to unleash. A sound was heard, and as the notes reverberated through the air, Muna was filled with a sense of wonder. He had never heard such sounds before, and the strange sensation left him trembling with uncertainty. And in a panic, he cast the flute aside and fled to the safety of his mother's hut, unable to explain the strange occurrence that had just transpired. His mother, who was mending his torn clothes, looked up with concern, sensing his distress. She tried to comfort him with gentle and soothing touches, asking him with gestures what the matter was. But Muna, unable to express what he had just experienced, waved his hand, signaling that all was well. Though his heart still raced with lingering fear, the sound he heard stayed with him throughout the night, that he couldn't sleep. At night, as Muna lay awake in bed, the echoes of the flute's music haunted him, filling his mind with visions of untold wonders. Unable to shake the memory of the strange sounds, he resolved to return to the garden in the morning and confront the mystery that lay buried there. With the first light of dawn, Muna hurried to the spot where he had discarded the flute. his heart pounding with anticipation. This time he approached the instrument with caution, blowing into it gently and listening intently as the notes danced through the air. He heard sounds that his ears couldn't decipher. In joy and excitement, he began to blow more air into the instrument, producing more sounds that were so melodious that he got lost in the euphoria of the miracle he was experiencing. For the first time in his young life, Muna was able to hear sounds, and not just sounds, but beautiful, melodious sounds he could not understand. He later got exhausted, stopped playing with the flute, and decided that he was going to keep it. He turned to go back home with his newfound toy and stopped on his tracks with shock. Everywhere in his mother's once barren garden was a cultivated bed of crops of different types growing on them. He wondered at what is happening, but even as he reveled in the miracle unfolding before him, a sense of unease gnawed at Mona's heart. He knew instinctively that the power of the flute was not meant to be wielded lightly, and that its secrets were not meant to be shared with the world. And so, with a cautious heart, Mona resolved to keep the flute's power hidden, guarding it as his own precious secret, afraid of what it may cause if its existence becomes known. For his father has once written on the ground of the legend of Agonta's flute. Agonta had been their forefather, but the flute has never been seen by anyone who lived after him, not even his grandchildren or their children. And for that reason, people had always thought that it was mere folklores and stories. As Mona turned to leave the garden behind, a newfound sense of purpose filled his soul, guiding him on a path. And so Mona began using it secretly for his poor widowed mother to grow her farm produce, and he would secretly go to other people's farmland to use the flute. This way, he put the flute to its rightful use. And that was how the village began to prosper once again. As Mona continued to use the flute in secret, his mother's farmland flourished, and their once meager existence was transformed into one of abundance and prosperity. With each gentle note played on the flute, the barren earth yielded forth its bounty, and Mona's heart swelled with pride at the knowledge that he was able to provide not only for his beloved mother, but for people at large in his village. But as their wealth grew, so did the suspicion of Muna's wicked uncle, who watched their newfound prosperity with envy and suspicion. Determined to uncover the source of their success, he kept a close eye on Muna and his mother, searching for any clue that might reveal the secret behind their good fortune. It was not long before the uncle stumbled upon the truth, observing from a distance as Muna wielded the flute with practiced skill, coursing forth life from the barren soil. As he watched, he recalled the tales told by his fathers of a flute which was used by their forebear Agunta to raise the wealth of their village and to provide food for everyone. A plan began to form in his twisted mind, a plan to steal the flute for himself and claim his power as his own. With cunning and determination, the uncle waited for the right moment to strike, biding his time until Muna was alone and vulnerable. And when the chance finally presented itself on a fateful day, Muna was having his bath and his mother was not at home. The wicked uncle crept into the room and stole the flute lying open on the bed, walking away triumphantly. Muna came out and knew immediately that something was wrong because he couldn't find the flute he had kept on top his clothes. He turned the room inside out but still couldn't find it. His mother came back from the market and met him scattering the entire house. When she found out what he was looking for, she joined, but no matter how hard they searched, the flute could not be found anymore. They sat down dejected and afraid of what will happen to their land if the flute had fallen into the wrong hands. The wicked uncle hid the flute in his house until the following day. At the first light of dawn, the wicked uncle crept silently through the field, clutching the stolen flute in his trembling hands. His heart beat with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as he approached his parched farmland, eager to wield the power he believed was rightfully his. With a sense of triumph, he raised the flute to his lips and blew into it with all the force he could muster. But instead of the sweet melodies he had hoped to summon, a discordant, terrible, and fearsome sound filled the air, sending shivers down his spine. He realized that something was wrong immediately, but no matter how skillfully he played, no grass sprang forth from the ground beneath his feet, no crops flourished at his command. Instead, to his horror, the earth beneath his feet began to crack and crumble, the once lush crops withering before his eyes as if touched by some unseen curse. The soil turned dry and dusty, parched by the relentless heat of the sun, and the wicked uncle's dream of wealth and prosperity turned to dust along with it. In panic, he dropped the flute, the sound of its impact echoing like death sound in the silent morning air. With trembling hands, he frantically tried to reverse the damage he had wrought, but it was too late. The damage was done, and there was no undoing the devastation he had unleashed. What he forgot in his greed and wickedness was that the legends spoke of a condition attached to the flute, that it only responds to the state of your heart and not necessarily the skill you have to produce a sound. And as he looked upon the desolate wasteland that had once been his pride and joy, he tried to break the flute in anger, but no matter how much strength he applied, the flute could not be broken. Instead, the ground began to open where he stood, and every time he tried to break it, the ground cracks opened a little more. In fear, he ran home and buried the flute at his backyard. Every day he wakes up to one tragedy or the other in his house. Either his harvested preserved produce are drying up and turning into dust, or one member of his family is sick or worse, dead. Finally, he summoned courage and returned the flute to Mona after months of suffering without explanation. With the return of the flute to Mona's hand, the village of Mavino once again flourished under his stewardship. Mona, the once poor and marginalized boy, became a symbol of prosperity and well-being, his selfless art of kindness spreading far and wide. But unfortunately, no matter what he tried, the tragedy of his uncle's house never abated. He watched as his uncle's children died one after the other, until one day they woke up to find that his house had crumbled and his uncle was laying dead beneath its roof. After these things, no one dared to challenge Mona's ownership of the flute, for the fate that had befallen his wicked uncle served as a cautionary tale to all who would dare to covet its power. And so Mona lived out the rest of his days in peace and contentment, surrounded by the love and admiration of his fellow villagers. As the years passed, Mona's legend grew, his name whispered in awe and reverence by all who knew his deeds. And though he remained deaf and dumb, but the melodies from the flute and his actions spoke louder than words could ever utter. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a soul at peace, Mona lived a prosperous and happy life, his legacy enduring long after he had passed on. For in the village that had once been Movino, his memory lived on as a beacon of hope and inspiration for generations to come. The end. Hi. I hope you enjoyed the ride. Hope you learned something, you took something away from this story. May that which is ours not be taken. God bless you. Please subscribe, like, share, leave your comments. I would like to hear from you. Check out the other videos. Thank you. Bye.